Hi everyone. It's so great to be here today. As many of you know, I used to work here at the Research and Training Center, and it's been a while since I've been back. And it's also great because this is one of my favorite topics, so I'm looking forward to talking to everybody today and then hearing your questions later on. I think if we can start with putting us all on the same page here, we're going to talk about creative employment strategies today. And as many of you know, I have been involved with supported employment for, 20-some years now. And when I left VCU and was at the University of Georgia, I had one of the customized employment 5-year demonstration projects. And so starting to explore some of the customized employment strategies. And my thoughts are that customized employment is really good supported employment, but the exciting thing about it is it gave us a few strategies that might be a little different that are very helpful in coming up with some different types of employment options for folks. And so I want to talk about some of those today. When I moved to Kansas, I left all my grants behind, and so starting over, it took a little while to develop some of those projects. And I would get calls from people all the time going, oh, so-and-so needs a job, my son or my daughter or my client or my student, and what can we do? And so what I found to be so helpful was, the first thing I would say is just let's schedule an employment team meeting. And we would all get together, as many people as we could. Ideally, the list of people is there that we have the person and the rehabilitation counselor and their case manager and their job coach and benefits planner and then maybe some other people. And that lineup might sound very familiar to you with other meetings, but this one is a little different because the way that we approached it was employment is the goal. Basically an employment first meeting for an individual. And you know there's so many statewide initiatives going on right now. So we came to the meeting with the idea this person is going to work. So how are we going to make that happen? And it was amazing how getting people together, kind of with permission to explore employment possibilities, of how creative we could become, regardless of what resources were available or what personnel were available, what funding was available, we were able to come up with some really cool options for folks. So let me just give you an idea. If you meet Judy, this was a person that the mom wanted her to work and the teacher, the vocational coordinator, and so did Judy. And so I said, let's have the employment team meeting, and we got together, and the first thing they said was, when I asked what Judy's passion was, is KU stuff. Now, if any of you all keep up with sports, you know that the University of Kansas won the championship this year in basketball and football, and they've done really well. And even before that, KU stuff was everywhere, and now it's even more places. So here we start with a person's passion, looking at, okay, what are we going to do with something related to KU? Because I found that if we can explore what somebody really likes and become creative around that, then we not only come up with some really cool options, but we also find things that the individual will enjoy doing. So the process that we use to figure this out is, first of all, get the employment team meeting together and brainstorm all the options that we can think of. And at this point, you just throw out anything. And, you know, not that any idea could possibly be stupid, as my just turned 16-year-old daughter calls everything, but to just throw it out and give people permission to do that. And you know what I find is that if so-and-so throws out an idea, then another individual will throw out, and that will spark another idea from a different person. And this energy is what helps us explore some of these different options that we may not have even thought about before. So after we get all of those listed out there, then looking at, well, let's see, what are these possibilities and what might work, what might not work? Looking at the individual, the business community, and exploring some of the different options. Looking at the businesses and finding out, if this is a particular situation that might work for this community in this business. For example, self-employment or resource ownership or wage employment, and looking at the different possibilities within that person's passion. Finding out what was needed and who could do what, and that's a place where the employment team meeting is so helpful to explore these things. And then figuring out a course of action. So let me tell you specifically how it worked for Judy here. Judy is pursuing a self-employment option, and it's in development right now. All the pieces are pretty much in place. The different thing with Judy is her self-employment was started while she was still in school, and the transition coordinator took the lead on having the meeting and bringing everybody together. We had linkages with vocational rehabilitation and the Medicaid waiver and case management, who were instrumental in helping to figure out some of this, to have some of the resources and funding to explore with her self-employment initiative. The way that we got started with her idea of self-employment is in our brainstorming stages that we had going on, and we were talking about the KU stuff, is that one of the customized employment positions that we discovered in Georgia was somebody having a kiosk inside of a coffee shop. In fact, we had several different kinds of businesses in the coffee shops. And as a result of that, we came up with the idea of having a kiosk in a coffee shop where she would sell KU stuff in addition to reading materials, gift baskets with coffee and other products from the coffee shop that she could sell there. And so we explored that option with the business community and found a coffee shop that was very willing to do that and interested in it, because they saw it as a really a moneymaker for them. If people would come in because they could buy things, they could read while they were drinking coffee and eating the food, they would stay longer. So it ended up being something that would bring customers into the business, as well as those existing customers would be customers for Judy. So the vocational transition coordinator went to the Small Business Development Center, who was very helpful in developing the business plan and the market projections and some of those things that may be a stumbling block for people that are just new in developing self-employment initiatives. And so we drafted the business plan and negotiated this reading material kiosk within the coffee shop. Now, the really nice thing about this, by initiating it while she was still in school, her last year in school, is that the teacher negotiated a work experience with the coffee shop while we were developing the business. And that way, Judy could get familiar with the customers became familiar with her, and so did the people that worked at the coffee shop. And she did a market analysis. She developed this tiny little survey that she explored with the customers to find out what kind of reading materials they would like. And the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, U.S. News and People were some items that were top on the list for most of the people. So then we finalized the business plan, and vocational rehabilitation was instrumental in arranging for a speech device for her, because Judy has just very limited speech, and also the startup materials that she needed for her business, the kiosk and things. Now, Judy doesn't have any money skills, and so what we worked out was, since Judy had experience at this coffee shop through her work experience, then while she was there for her business, the coffee shop would ring up all of her sales for her in exchange for her being in the back when she had time and straightening up the coffee and creamer section and restocking that for them. So it was a trade-off arrangement with the two of them. So she sold her KU baskets, and she also had, we worked out with the mom and the case manager to do the ongoing ordering for her and keeping track of her records. The other nice thing, while she was in school, but she just finished, we're out of school now 3 weeks ago, whereas I think over here in the East, y'all still have a few more weeks to go, but So she just left. But while she was in school, there was a regular education student who also helped with her financial management and as part of the school curriculum. Now, the other thing with business cards and t-shirts and advertising, we tapped into another student. And as I mentioned, we try and get really creative with the resources, because I know oftentimes we feel like we have a stumbling block because we go, where are we going to get the money to do something? And so that's where looking at all of these different options that might exist in the community come in real handy to be able to fund somebody's business or some of these creative options. And for this particular person, we needed to do some marketing, and we had another student who was able to do that. And how I've gotten so good at kind of this bartering between businesses and different people is one of my projects is starting businesses for people in Peru, which is a way of life for many individuals down there, an entrepreneurial society, but not so much for people with disabilities. And I'll never complain about resources again in the United States because we don't have funding sources down there to work with, and we don't have agencies. So we're starting businesses for people pretty much on a shoestring, and been able to do a lot of this kind of bartering and negotiating from one business to the other. And so we did that here, and the person that we did that with was another student named Jenny, and her passion is art. And these are some of her pictures here that she draws, and her mom helps color some of the designs. And she does note cards and t-shirts, and she worked with developing some of the business cards and things for Judy. Jenny's passion is the art, and you give her a topic and she ends up being able to draw a design around that topic. And her art, she set up at the APSI conference when it was in Kansas City last year and sold so many of her pictures, and her mom was just thrilled, going, oh, well, Jenny can be in business for herself. And so she's 17 years old and planning on being in school till she's 21. And the school has begun developing her business plan. And we don't have vocational rehabilitation funding as of yet. In Kansas, they don't pick up until the last year of school. We're working on getting funding earlier and getting her on the caseload. But in the meantime, what we have worked out is to get some initial funding from our Developmental Disability Council, the Governor's Council on Developmental Disabilities. And they put out seed money to people to start their own business. And so that's been submitted and supposed to hear, I think, in like the next month, in July. Here's some of Jenny's designs. I have a t-shirt with this, no, the next one. She does have t-shirts with this, and she also has the note cards and everything. This is the one that I have the t-shirt for, and her designs are just spectacular, and we're really thrilled about getting her business going. So the way we've decided to work this, while she's in school, she'll have the school support to start her business, and if we get the funding from the Governor's Council, it would be for some startup materials for her. And then she'll operate the business while she's in school. And then the business plan that has been developed allows for expansion of her business when she leaves school. And at that point, voc rehab resources would come in. So we designed it to be a smaller business while she's in school, and then a larger business once she is leaving, with the provisions of vocational rehabilitation funding coming in. That all came out of the employment team meeting. Again, it's in development, but it's well on its way, and everybody is participating. So when we start with an employment team meeting and then an individual's passion that drives everything that we're going to develop during that meeting, then what kind of outcomes can we achieve? And I mentioned some of these before: wage employment, created jobs, carved jobs, resource ownership, self-employment, and combination employment. And what I'd like to do is just illustrate all of these through stories, because to me they're much more meaningful to see what people have accomplished with these strategies. So first of all, I want to introduce you to Cindy, and her passion is working with children and photography. And while she was in school, she had a work experience at a daycare, and they hired her on full-time when she left school. And as a result, she has benefits there. And because she got a full-time job, her family felt that she was capable of moving into her own apartment. And because she picked an apartment that was fairly costly, her paying for her medical insurance through work was prohibitive. So she's on the Working Healthy, which is the Medicaid buy-in, and she gets her insurance through her medical coverage through there now. But she is working she is in her own apartment. She's working at the daycare, and one of the biggest issues for her was transportation, which we still are constantly trying to work at. It's been a year and a half now, but she's carpooling with coworkers, and it's a constant scheduling of different coworkers who are going to be responsible for driving her at different times, and she pays them for doing that. But one of the things that she really wanted to do was be able to drive herself, and her family felt that that was not an option for her. But because she was working and looking extremely competent to them, they allowed her to participate in a driver education course and the assessment through vocational rehabilitation to see whether or not she really can drive, and to find out if she can't from those sources that would be giving that recommendation for her driver's license. And the nice thing about this job is the employer has a child care certification that they are working, that they have all of their employees participate in, and Cindy is doing that as well, and participating with her coworkers who provide that support in the classroom for her. She's pretty much a loner and developing friendships through these contacts with her coworkers. But the more we kept talking to her, going, how's your job going, and what do you think, and how's your apartment? Well, it turns out she was kind of isolated and needing to get connected with people more. And as we talked about it, we found out that her passion was photography. It was something that she always wanted to do. So she's continuing to work at the daycare with the children, and what we started was exploring a photography option. So we went to one of the drugstores with the photo counters, and she works on a Saturday for a few hours as a clerk in that photography area, so that she can start getting connected with people who have a similar interest in photography, and maybe explore whether or not this could actually be something that she pursues through taking some courses, maybe getting a part-time job with photography. So we're giving her that option to explore those things. And VR has been involved. They've been terrific with helping with resources and transportation and her driver's ed, and now looking at the career advancement, because we're not sure if she's going to stay with childcare or if she might move on into the photography, or both. So it's really an exciting time for her, and we're just looking at those options as we go. Let me introduce you to Sally. And Sally was somebody right after I moved to Kansas that the parents contacted me, and Sally had gotten a job through her school when she left, and it was at a hospital. And she was about to lose that job. So the family contacted me because she loved working there. It was a great location, and not sure what to do. So I went and I met with the employer and talked, and it turned out that the hospital was cutting back, and there was really no need for this position of tray passer, of putting the condiments on the tray as it went down. But they were open to exploring what other options might be available. And you know, of course, everybody said, oh, how about a sunshine girl? And it's just like the greeter at Walmart. Everybody thinks that these are the greatest options for people, and they're not really the types of jobs that have a great deal of security or that we can even get into very often. And so I just explored around the hospital, and I was walking around looking to see what can I find that would be a good job for her. And especially in an economic environment where this hospital was cutting back personnel. And so I wanted something there where there was some job stability for her. So when I walked into medical records and looked, this is what I found: mounds and mounds of paper. And I want this job, I need to look at it. So I explored the job, and it turned out that the job requires filing all of these documents and putting them into people's charts. It's a very critical position because these individuals, if they're discharged today and they come back tomorrow, it has to be in their file for the physician to be able to pull the records. And as a result, quality, accuracy were extremely critical. And when I talk to medical records, they are saying, well, we're coding all of these and we just don't always have time to file those. So I said, well, what about the idea of having someone come in and they file these and get them organized for you, and then you just put them into the charts. So that was a very attractive option to the employer. Well, Sally does not have the filing skills to be able to decide on this 8-digit code, the account number or the patient ID number, how to file by the 8 digits. So I did this in my office and I worked it out, and it actually does work by taking these black file cabinets that you see, and there's about 10 sequences of those, and they go through 10 to 20, 20 to 30 label on each tray. And then the next set of trays is like 0 to 10, 11 to 20. So what she does is she sorts it by the last 2 digits, and then she takes the first tray of documents out, goes to the next level of filing, and then she pulls out the first one there and goes to the next level, and continues this sequence, and it actually works. And then when she gets to the end, you pull them out and you turn them upside down. If you put them in that order, they come out correctly. So Tish, the job coach, came in and worked with her, provided the training. Well, what happened as a result, which we all well know, is when somebody does a good job, then the employer thought it was just exciting. Well, now how about getting Sally to file the actual file, the medical record files? And as we're looking at that, they are very thick. They did not fit in those little black file dividers there. So we got Rehab Engineering to come in, and they built this wooden mobile filing system that's very similar as the black ones, the black trays, but they're more vertical so that you can file the sequence of numbers and put them in order the same way. The advantage to them is that they're color-coded as well. So Sally is working there. She's an HR clerk. She works 20 hours a week, and she earns $9.55 an hour, has some benefits. And she just took a cruise not long ago to Greece as her vacation and is just really enjoying her position there. The job coach provided the training and support and still continues with a follow-along of going in and monitoring on the task analysis her ability to do those steps, because if we leave anything out, there's going to be errors. And in addition, to monitor her quality. We want to make sure that she's at a very high accuracy level because we don't want any of these documents to be misfiled. Another individual, looking at a carved position. This person was working at a bank, and he had been there for many years, and they contacted me because there were some problems and not sure what to do. And so I went over there and talked to them, and so I just hung out with the coworkers and followed Gary around and kind of did an assessment of what was going on. And it was interesting because what Gary brought to the employer when he was hired was his sense of humor, and everybody loved it, and it drew people to him. But what happened is, when I was there with him, people were running away, literally trying to get away from him. And I couldn't figure out what was going on, and it turned out that when he started there, he would tell a joke, and everybody would laugh and enjoy that. But this was many years later, and he was still telling the same joke. And people were getting pretty tired of hearing it and didn't want to laugh anymore. And as a result, his relationships at work were really getting damaged. And not only that was, he didn't have the follow-along support of supported employment, and as a result of that, he was doing his job too fast. He actually counts seconds, I believe, because no matter what time you ask him, I mean, whenever you see him, if you ask him what time it is, and there's no clock around or anything, he knows to this second what time it is. So I think he kind of keeps up at a very fast pace once he learns something. And he had all this downtime, so he had more time to go tell the same joke to every one of his coworkers. So what we did was we reopened his case, and Kathy Morrow Long from JobLink came in and did some work with him. And we provided some interventions, increasing his work duties, putting him on a schedule, using a dry erase board for marking some things, setting up a computer and office where he had his own space to go to and people could come to him. Looking at his the materials that he needed for breaks, so that when he went into a break room, he took some magazines or newspapers that were appropriate to be able to initiate conversations with people, and a checklist that he would complete and take to a person that he really admired at work at the end of every day, who would give him some feedback on how he was doing and the time he was taking to complete his job. But the biggest thing that we did that was the most helpful, and I think the most fun, was we helped him by buying him a joke book. And his housemates, the night before at dinner, would go over the joke with him for the next day, and they would all talk about it, and then the next morning they would rehearse it again. And so he would go into work and he would tell this joke to all of his coworkers. So now everybody's running up going, "Carrie, what's the joke today? What's going on? Tell us your joke." So it's really flipped things around and was a very small thing to do to change that whole environment. This is one that when I was in Georgia, the resource ownership, I think Doug Crandall and Nancy Brooks Lane have done some previous sessions with you guys, and they were big with resource ownership as well down there. And we had some great luck with it. I wish that we had better luck doing it in Kansas, and so far we have a few that look like they're going to go in that direction. I think it's a tremendous resource that we're underutilizing, and let me tell you about this. When we go get a job, we have our work history, we have our resume, we have our experience, and we bring that to the environment. This person, Joseph, he was in an institution most of his life, and then he was in a sheltered workshop. He did not have all these things to bring to the environment. And his favorite thing, his passion was cars and washing cars. And we all know that trying to find a job in a car wash is pretty much of a dead end. They're very seasonal. Sometimes you have to have a driver's license. They're cold and they're wet sometimes, and there's not much stability there. So we had our employment team meeting and we're brainstorming what kind of options. And as a result of that, somebody on the team had a friend who had a small car washing business. And we went and explored with them, what is it that you do? What if you had your wish list? You know, what would be the next step? And we found out that there is such a thing as car detailing. And so we went and contacted a business called All Star Detailing. And do you know, they wanted a mobile detailing. And this is the one that would actually come to your work while you're there all day and clean your car. And there's a machine for that. It's amazing. So what Joseph did was we negotiated a position with All Star Detailing. And how we did it was we said, Joseph brings this mobile detailing machine to you. And as a result, you hire him. And that's the benefit that he brings to your business. You have a qualified employee who is also bringing this detailing machine, which Joseph owns. And if he leaves that company, he takes it with him. And so they hired him. And it's been really exciting because Joseph didn't have any transportation where he was living. But the detailing machine needs to have a trailer to pull it. And so that was another piece of what he bought. And the employer says, well, I'll go pick him up every day, and then I can get the machine and we take it with us. And as a result of that, he's got transportation, and then the coworkers are providing some training and support to him on an ongoing basis. So he brought this asset into the business, and oftentimes vocational rehabilitation can buy some of these things. We had one person that wanted to work for a catering company, and we bought her a huge industrial-sized refrigerator that she took to this mom-and-pop catering business. It was outside my office forever, and we just, it just took up the whole hallway. But we got that business going, and I'll never forget, it was like a year later, that employer called up and said, oh, well, now I need an industrial stove. And we go, no, it doesn't work that way. But the employee brings this piece of equipment. And it is something that can be purchased. We did have some grant dollars there. We also had vocational rehabilitation and workforce investment kinds of dollars that we would put together. But it is something that's kind of difficult for people to think about putting their resources into that. We have had others with computers, particularly in a daycare, where somebody brought a computer and educational software into that environment. And that seems to be something that's easier for agencies to feel comfortable purchasing. Now let's talk about self-employment. And this person, their business just, let's see, right before I left to come here, I just got word that she had her second customer. And this is Bee's business. And Bee has a laundry business. And this started because I was presenting in Western Kansas, and her mom happened to hear me, and something caught her eye, and she contacted her agency that was supporting Bee, and she said, Bee needs to do this. I want a self-employment for Bee. And it came as a result of talking about this individual, which Doug Crandall and Nancy Brooks Lane down in Georgia had helped him start his own business. And this is Robert. And Robert liked to push buttons and to have the swish of water. And so they started his own business in a linen business, so that he was in the Atlanta area, and he went out and he had customers, and he got their towels, called Keep It Clean was his business, and he would pick them up and he would bring them back to his home, and he would wash and dry them and package them and take them back. And this was the business that sparked the interest for Bee. So when I met Bee, she was working in a community-based enclave through one of the providers, and she had always wanted to do laundry. She loved washing and folding clothes. Because of accessibility and just the job market, finding a job where she could do that had not panned out. So we all got together at the employment team meeting, and we just brainstormed. And again, we started, this is the outcome. It is going to be that Bee has her own business. It's a linen business, so where do we go from here? It makes it so much easier than sitting there trying to figure out, how do we do it? Because we are going to do it, and we have to. So it puts a challenge to just figuring it out. So we went to the Small Business Development Center. Christy Bittinger from JobLink was a great asset to developing this wonderful business plan for Bee. But I'll never forget, when we were at the Small Business Development Center, Bee has limited communication, and she kept saying, I want a job, I want a job. And the guy that ran the Small Business Development Center that was helping us kept turning to her going, Bee, you don't want a job, you want customers. So now Bee walks around going, I want customers, I want customers. It was just the greatest thing to see that shift in her thinking about it. So vocational rehabilitation, the provider, a Medicaid waiver, and the Governor's Council on Developmental Disabilities were all the resources that were used to start her business. A big part of that was renovating her house. It was not accessible for her to be able to run a business out of, and she's in a wheelchair, and also for the industrial washer and dryer. So that was all taken care of through those resources, and I really like her marketing that they developed. This is a little postcard that they're mailing out, and then her business card that they had. They hired a marketing person to develop. And like I say, she has her second customer now of a hair salon where they're going to pick up the towels and then wash them and sanitize them and re-deliver them back. her plans for expansion are to go to, what do you call it, gyms, and then the idea of tattoo parlors, because they use towels too. So I'm going to explore that and see what might pan out for increasing her clientele. Now, this is Crystal with combination employment, and I just bring this up because what I find, like I say, when we just go with the idea we're going to do it, and we go out and explore, like with Judy's business, where we started with the KU idea. I never know where they're going to go. And people say, how do you sit there and think about these things? And I don't. I think about them, but I never know where they're going to end up. And it's always amazing to me of all the possibilities that happen when we just open our minds up and actually start pursuing these things. So with Crystal, she was one of the people in Georgia that we worked with a coffee kiosk. And it was the idea of, well, in this coffee shop, how about increasing the business? Think about it. If people come in and they're drinking coffee and they're eating food, but you have reading material for them, they're probably going to stay longer and eat more food. So we approached the employer about that and said, what about if Crystal brings the materials for this kiosk? Would you hire her? Which would be a resource ownership position. And so the employer agreed to that. But then what we found is when Crystal wasn't there, the employer was still able to sell her magazines. It became self-employment. And Crystal can't count money, which is oftentimes what I hear people say is, oh, so-and-so could start their own business, but they can't do. That's where you can decide whether resource ownership or self-employment might be the best strategy, where you negotiate with whatever resources you have available to make that situation happen. And in Crystal's case, she couldn't count the money. And that's why we thought we'd go with resource ownership. But the employer agreed to ring up her sales for 5% of the amount on the sale. So that opened doors for her to sell the magazines and the reading materials when she wasn't there, and it became self-employment, and then she became a business for herself and was no longer on the employer's payroll. But it was this combination that developed as we started moving forward with this particular idea. So coworkers provide that support on the job site, and the vocational rehabilitation was the funding source for those the kiosk materials. Okay, so what can we do to achieve these outcomes? They sound great, but what can we do as a provider to get started and make these kinds of things happen? And I really highly recommend following through with these simple steps. And that is, first of all, start with the individual's passion. What is it that they like? What do they want to do? And then look at the creative employment options that might flow from there, and just do your brainstorming. For example, I have a lot of people, young folks that want to work with animals, and you know, it's really hard to find jobs in that area. We just only have a limited number, and so we've explored some other options. And just to give you an idea, one of those is a dog food delivery business. And thinking of that came out because of somebody like me that has tons of animals and would absolutely love for somebody to deliver my horse and dog and cat food for me. And so we explored with a pet store, and they said, no, that's not a good option for us, because we want customers to come in and buy from us because they do impulse buying. So we learned the market of that. But then we found out that a farm store, a feed store, is more than happy to jump on that. And so we're exploring that option for an individual who would like to have a job with animals. And in this case, with self-employment, they could purchase a van, and then we could hire a driver to take the individual around and provide the support that he needs on that type of work. The other idea that we're in the middle of doing right now was a dog washing business. And this one, we've got a couple ideas that we're exploring with this particular business. And one is to set up a place where people can come and wash their animals. The other is to make it mobile so that you go to the dog parks and people, after their dogs play out there, they can come wash their animal before they head home. So there seems to be a market for that, and that business plan is at the final stages of development right now. So we look at all these options, and then what is the best situation for that person? And you look at what kinds of supports does that person need? What resources are available? And looking at the business community, what kinds of jobs would be supported in this community? What market do we have for a particular idea? And then looking at, well, once we figure some of these things out, then where do we have to go from here? Do we go contact businesses? Do we develop a job? Do we develop a business plan? Do we consider resource ownership? And then how do we go about making the final arrangements? I think following through these steps, as we talked about with some of these stories, I have found this to be very, very helpful. It seems overwhelming to me to think about finding funding or resources for the whole employment situation, but when I break it down into individual pieces, it's much easier to pursue those things. So just to highlight, this is how I have made it work, and hopefully it will be a useful tool for you. I've found that if somebody takes the lead, you arrange an employment team meeting, and you establish from the get-go, employment is the outcome. You always have people that come in and go, yes, but I don't think, Susie can't. That's not part of the discussion. I stop that right from the beginning. Come into it, Susie is going to work. She wants a job. This is what her passion is. What are we going to do about it? And, you know, I find that the group just becomes so creative. It's almost like giving permission to all of us that are in supported employment, customized employment, who are very creative people, but get caught up in the agency constraints and funding constraints and so worried about, well, how can we take that away for an hour to figure this out? And as a result, people get so excited and they feed on each other. For example, one team meeting we went to, this person loved, the only thing they liked to do, they sat at home, they liked video games. And so we learned everything there was about the gaming industry and starting your own business for an individual in the gaming world, which was a whole new area for me. So once we can identify all these things, then have people go out and explore. What can we do? Just like the example with the pet food business. Where do we need to go? Who has a contact? Who has a friend? Who can go out and explore that? And I always assign homework, one step for everybody, including the individual who wants a job, asking them, can you ride around and with your family and tell us what business looks good to you? Or if they're interested in something, can you go talk to so-and-so and see what they can give you? So that everybody has a task, everybody's invested. And then come back and we share all that information. And that is what allows us to become more specific, more realistic in our employment planning for this particular person around that passion that we talked about. Then we develop this is what we're thinking of doing. We're going to explore resource ownership. We're going to explore self-employment. What are the steps we need to take to do that? And who's going to be responsible for each step? And what is the timeline for doing that? And this is a good time to be looking at what other funding is available, what other resources. So if you've got a step and you've got to look at what kind of money do you have to buy that thing with. Maybe somebody goes and explores something with the Small Business Administration, and how do other people who start their own business purchase this particular item, or talk to somebody else who's in a business to find out. So you're going out and looking at more resources than just the waiver, which is what I always hear. So-and-so's not on the waiver, so they can't work. This allows you to look at more. So you figure out what business arrangement that person is going to have and go make those business development contacts so that you can find out. Remember, this is supported self-employment, supported resource ownership. supported, created, and carved jobs. So we need to look at that environment where that person is and figure out the situation. For example, somebody may want their own business. If they started at home, they might be very isolated and need more prompting from another person. So that's where a business within a business might be a valuable strategy for that person, because there are more cues and environmental supports that might be available. So we make those final arrangements and then negotiate any support arrangements. And that's where, like I say, those kinds of supports are what often drives the final configuration of what this business will be. And what are the advantages of this? Well, let me tell you, remember when I said I started this strategy because at the time I didn't have the grant resources, and I need to figure out a way where I could participate long distance with a lot of people around a huge geographical area and provide that support and make these outcomes happen. And this was a strategy that would work by doing the homework, coming back, being able to follow up, continuing that process. We were able to do those things. So what does it give us? Well, it's a different way of thinking, because remember, we're not looking at can somebody, we are looking at they can, let's do it, this is how we're going to do it. But you know what? By bringing the whole group together and everybody sharing their ideas, their connections, any information they have around a particular passion, you would not believe how your resources just become greater and greater and greater. You know, sitting there, you think about it, and I hear this so much from staff with the providers, that they're sitting back in their office going, oh, can David have his own business? Or could Susie do this? And it's really hard to sit there alone and try and figure that out. But by being in the same room with other people that have a friend, that have a friend, that have a friend, that knew this person, that did this, that comes to the table. So you don't have to know everything about everything. You get that from some of the people that are participating. And everybody has their expertise that they share, and they all have their contributions. And so it may seem more difficult to get started at first, but once you get going, it is much easier, because you just have a greater wealth of resources to use. And you're looking at a lot more funding opportunities and supports, because we're not just looking in the disability community. It forces us to be creative. It forces us to look at non-traditional jobs. The lists are endless of the ideas that we have come up with, some that worked, some that didn't, and many, many examples of people that are out there working in one of these different strategies that we've talked about through this process. It puts the individuals in the driver's seat. In fact, some of the individuals have developed a PowerPoint about themselves and what they would like to do through this online self-determination curriculum that we've developed, and bringing that to the meeting, particularly people who are nonverbal and would have that information to share about their passion and what they like. The other thing that I think has made me be very committed to this process is it expands these options to people that maybe don't have the financial resources, particularly those that, like I say, are not on the waiver. I see it, you know, there's I hear all the time that so-and-so is on a list for years waiting for services. Well, this allows us to bypass those systems, to move forward and get going. And if we do a business plan, perhaps we add those resources in down the road in our projection of where this person will be in the future. Okay, so it's not a piece of cake. Let's just look at what are some of the challenges, because I know many of you are going to try and get started and do things, and these are some things so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. That are some problems that we've run into that may be challenges for you. And one is figuring out, who is this for? Because like I said, sitting back in your office and trying to figure out makes it really difficult. I let the meeting determine that. You know, if somebody wants to work, bring them to the meeting and let it flow from there, so you're not sitting back trying to go, how could so-and-so do this? And then the staffing issue. Not only having enough staff, having staff that are trained and qualified and have the skills to do something like this, and then giving them the permission within this the staffing structure and the pay for performance to be able to go and explore some of these options and to be creative. Developing a business plan. The one for B's business, Christy, it took a long time to do, much longer than the reimbursement from Voc Rehab was sufficient to cover. And so what they negotiated with the Voc Rehab agency is a separate line item for developing a business plan. So now they have that option as a separate funding stream, and another provider has done that too in Kansas, so that might be an option as well, so that you are reimbursed for that extra time it might take. The other thing is leveraging other dollars and resources. As much as we come up with those ideas and we want them, sometimes it's very time consuming to try and bring those other people to the table and have them share the resources that they need. It's somewhat reminiscent of the transition meetings many years ago, where before it was law, where we would try and leverage other resources. But I find that if they're in the beginning, in the front end, with that creative part of the meeting, they're more invested, and somebody will say, oh, well, I can pay for the job coaching, and somebody can say, well, then I can buy this. And that's how I see it happening quite often, and almost like a chess game, so that you move around the resources, so that if Voc Rehab says I can buy all of this, but and job coaching, but not both, then you can look at, well, where can we get job coaching? Well, maybe somebody starts their own business then, and they hire somebody who can provide that support, and Voc Rehab buys the other equipment. So it's looking at what are all the resources you have, and then moving them around to make sure everything is covered. The other challenge that you can run into is missing key people. The reason why Judy's business, the first person I mentioned, is still in development is because we don't have a job coach. We thought we did, and there's no provider in that area, and consequently there's no job coach. So we are back to figuring out a creative way to provide the training and support that she needs without compromising the commitment to her and to the employer of that support. Sometimes working out the ongoing supports, the extended services, can be a challenge, and that oftentimes will drive how we shape the creative employment strategy that we're going to use to make sure we have that ongoing extended service for somebody. Now, the big thing is the potential risk or loss on investment. This is, remember, with support employment, we always put a lot in the front end. This is putting even more on that planning piece in the front end of looking at what can we do, and then following through with that. And then we've had people change their mind, just like we always have, but we've invested all this time in the front end, and it makes it a lot of time put in that we may not get any return on, and that can be somewhat difficult to manage. And then I think the biggest thing, I was just meeting with a provider the other day, and I think the struggle is, how do we get started? You know, it's almost like a systems change. It's a different way of doing it, but more than likely, it's a different way of thinking. So we're looking at somebody of, they can work, here's what we can brainstorm, here's what we can do, and then making it happen. And it's kind of flipping it from the back end to the front end, and starting with that outcome from the very beginning. And sometimes just getting started and taking the time in our busy schedules can be quite challenging to figure out how we're going to go about doing that. And my suggestion is then start with one person, just one person, even if it's one person with an agency or one person on your caseload. Just call some people together, and you be that person that starts it out. You be that person that makes a difference, and you bring the person's passion to the table, and just see what flows from that dialogue. Now, what I'd like is to find out what your experiences have been, and what kinds of questions or potential problems you think you might have, or you have had, in doing something similar to this. So I'd love to hear your experiences and your challenges and your successes and your questions, and we can follow up with that in the chat room. And then at a later time, you're more than welcome to contact me. My information is here by phone or email, any way that's convenient, and we can brainstorm over the phone. We can come up with some ideas and go from there if you don't have the folks together to do an employment team meeting. Whatever would work, anything I can share, any resources, I will be glad to. So I will talk to you all in the chat room.